Good morning and welcome to today's NENS webinar, which is entitled Pandemic Plundering, How Hackers Are Cashing In on COVID-19. My name is Ted Holstein. I'm your host for today's event. First, let's go through a few housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode. Today's session will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. Thank you for joining in for the live session. Your questions are strongly encouraged throughout the presentation. I'll be monitoring the Q&A log in real time, and we'll try to address that. We'll try to address your questions as we go along. Let me introduce our speakers. So first up is James Carroll. James is founder and principal at COZYBEAR. He is a professionally trained ethical hacker and penetration tester. When not hacking into his clients' networks, James is a frequent speaker and trainer at cybersecurity industry events. He also speaks frequently at industry events with non-technical senior management and leaders. James, nice to have you again back for the webinar.
As always, thanks, Ted.
All right. And next up is Michael Kourkoulakos. Michael is CEO at New England Network Solutions. He has been an IT professional for over 20 years. As an engineer, Michael focused on enterprise networking and security. Today, he spends most of his time guiding businesses on IT and cybersecurity strategy. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ted. We're going to have some fun today.
All right. So let me hand the ball to James, and he will take us from there.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ted and Mike, for having me. Got a really fun presentation. This was one of my favorite ones, and really part of that is just because it's so relevant. I call it pandemic plundering. What it is, it's really a journey into what hackers have been doing as of lately and how they're utilizing the coronavirus pandemic to really maximize their gains. I mean, we're seeing it now with Omicron or Omicron. I don't know how to pronounce it. I just think it sounds like a Pokemon if you ask me. But whatever the new variant is, I mean, hackers are all over it. Even the old variants, they're taking advantage of it. So that's what we're going through today.
It's only a Greek letter in the alphabet, James.
What was that?
Just the Greek letter in the alphabet. No big deal.
Exactly. I don't know. I like the Pokemon story. We're going to stick with the Pokemon. So who am I? I'm founder of COZYBEAR. We're an information security consulting firm. That on the right, you might have heard him barking. I actually think the FedEx guy came right at the start of the presentation, which is perfect timing because it's not going to interrupt me. But that's Duke. Duke is actually the head of HR. Any HR issues we have here, you bring them to Duke. He handles them great. He does bite, believe it or not. He looks adorable, but he's bitten, I think, 3 people so far. So if you come to him with a really sensitive issue, I'm not going to promise that he won't hurt you. Bad things might happen. How did I start hacking? And Ted, I know Ted loves this story because he's heard it a million times. So how I started hacking is I actually, in high school I was a big gamer. I'm still kind of a big gamer. But what I did is, in 2000, I think it was 2006, 2007, when I was in 8th grade, a game came out called Halo 2, and I loved the game. But the problem I had was I wasn't that good at it. And me and all my friends in high school, the goal, we'd get done with school at 2 o'clock, we'd go home. We'd play this game till like 3 in the morning, get up, go to school. Like, we were obsessed with it. How the game works is you play online with other people, and the goal is to get to the highest level. The highest level is a level 50. And I was like legitimately a level 20. Like, I wasn't that good. And my friends are like 30s and 40s. I'm like, I want to be higher level than my friends. So what I figured out is I started Googling stuff and researching stuff, and I found a way to essentially join a game with other people and automatically win. And how I would do that is I'd join a game, I'd be playing 6 other people all over the world, and I'd find their IP address, and then I'd boot them offline. I'd basically like turn off their internet through a denial of service attack. So after a while, I do a week of that. I'm winning every single game. My level starts skyrocketing. Within like 3 weeks, I'm level 50. I'm like, I did it. I'm level 50. And that's really how I started hacking, is doing denial of service-based attacks. And back then, this was like cutting edge, right? It was like, DDoS attacks were just starting to get commercialized by Anonymous. They were just releasing other tools like low orbit ion cannon, stuff like that. And I was on like the cutting edge of that stuff. And the thing that always fascinated me about hacking and how I got into it is just how easy it was. Like, I didn't know anything about networking. The only thing I knew is every time I did a denial service attack, my dad would yell at me because he couldn't get online with his laptop. That's all. I didn't really know anything else that I was doing, but it worked. And that's really where my passion started. I went to college for it. Started working at a variety of companies, testing and hacking, and I really fell in love with the industry at that point. These are the tools I used to use, like Zone Alarm Pro, Cane Enable. Cane Enable is like a real old, crusty hacking tool for Windows. If there's any like old school hackers, and I do this presentation, kind of frequently. If there's any old school hackers, like I remember Cane Enable from, back in the early 2000s. I'm like, yeah, it was like not even out of junior high school when you were using it, but it's a great product. I recommend checking it out. I don't even know if it supports the latest Windows, but it's really fun, a lot of fun. So current events, what am I seeing? What are we seeing just as an industry of how hackers are trying to exploit COVID? We're seeing a lot of phishing emails, and these phishing emails, the ones that I've been seeing, are usually emails targeted with COVID-19 data on it, and then they have an Excel document. And kind of the trend with hacking and phishing is macros, and they can come in Excel, Word, whatever, any Microsoft product you want. They typically come in, if you look at this picture on the left here, it says document.xlsm. The M on the end means macros. I like to say the M means malicious. So if you're getting a random email from someone and it's got XLSM on the end, usually means it's a macro. It usually gives you a password too, just to establish legitimacy. Like, hey, here's some information on COVID-19. Enter this password to open it. You open it, and then if you look at the bottom right there, that's an email. That's the inside of the Excel document, and that contains really detailed steps on how to enable macros. So clearly, these guys really want you to enable that. When you do that, that launches all sorts of VBS scripts and .NET shellcode runners and all sorts of crazy malicious stuff that really all it means is you get hacked. So we've been seeing a lot of this stuff really in Word and Excel. So, the educational part of the show, right? If you see stuff like this, you get something like this, especially if you get something and there's really detailed information on how to enable macros, you should definitely not enable macros. Even when I do phishing for clients, like I take the same exact scenario because it's wildly successful, right? Hackers are doing it because it works. People are clicking on it. The other thing, notice how good the English is in these phishes too, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago you're getting the Prince from Nigeria phishing emails where it was like the English was absolutely atrocious. This is like written by an American. Like this English is really, really, really good. And we're seeing these get better and better as time goes on. And I've seen phishing emails where I'm like, if I didn't know any better, I would have clicked on that thing because the English is so good. All right, we're going to take a little time travel here and party like it's March 2020 and really kind of examine how our life's changed from a business, right? So, gone are the days of your stressful office with your boss and someone blowing up the microwave. Now you're at home on your couch working in the luxury of your own home with your blanket, maybe a cup of Swiss Miss hot cocoa, a lot more of a relaxing environment. Gone are the days of the busy office cubicles and the bullpens and all that stuff, and offices are relatively empty at this point. From a technology standpoint, you probably, or maybe you've ditched your desktop PC for a laptop. So there's been quite a bit of shifting just from COVID in the work environment as well as the technology environment. I mean, we've seen things like Zoom become a commonplace. Like, I think I was talking to my grandma, it wasn't that long ago, I think it was Thanksgiving, and I was telling her, about what I do. It's like, oh, do you use Zoom? I'm like, how do you know what Zoom is? Like, you were an assembly person in the 60s, making sewing machines, and you're telling me you know what Zoom is? It's become ubiquitous. It's almost like the Band-Aid, like Zoom, Teams, you name it. VPNs, dial pad, right? VoIP phone systems and soft phones, Expensify, Office 365, TeamViewer. All of this cloud software is being implemented because remote work has been adopted. And when we talk about more software, the one thing we need to understand is more software means more entry points. That's more ways hackers can get in. And I've seen a lot of times companies that don't have a robust single sign-on solution, they have different logins for everything, right? Their Zoom, their dial pad, their Expensify, their mail, their VPN. The users have to use a different password for all of those. And what are they going to do? Well, they're not going to update their AD password with those other passwords. They're just going to update it when they need to update it. And almost always we find that there's at least one account that has a bad password on it, and there's at least one account that doesn't use two-factor authentication. And when we examine that and we were able to exploit that, we can really understand the benefits of having something like this, like an Okta or a single sign-on solution. More entry ports, of course, means more vulnerabilities.
James, sorry to interrupt. you like moved the slides over in like the viewing window and it kind of shifted over. Can you move it? There we go. Perfect.
That good?
Okay. Yep. All right. Sorry to interrupt.
No, Ted's always looking out for me. That's why I keep him around. He's good like that. So what did COVID do? The main thing that I like to emphasize is COVID increased complacency, and we've seen that a lot. You're working from home. I always like to say when you put on a dress shirt, right, a suit, you get in your car, you drive to the office, there's almost like a suit of armor that comes with that. And what I mean by that is your brain shifts from at home to at work. You're not as comfortable, right, as you would be, sitting on your lazy boy with your laptop, and you're not as complacent. When you're more comfortable, you become more complacent, and we've seen that happen a lot with COVID-19 and remote work. A lot of different scams, right? Hackers love to take advantage of COVID-19 and phishing, and they know there's remote work, people are more complacent, and phishing is becoming more successful than it was. The one thing we've had an increase in the most is an increase in hackers. Remote work, and we've even seen, people like myself who work from home, they might be subcontractors, they might be 1099 guys, and they're starting to do some malicious things for groups like CONT'd ransomware in their spare time. That's like their side hustle, right? It's an illegal side hustle, but they're using their skills. They're making a lot of money doing it, but they're using their skills for malicious purposes. And we've seen a big increase in hackers. The thing that surprised me, I was actually reading an article this morning that said hacks since October have been down 21%. And what a lot of experts think is because the quantity is going up, but the quality is going down. So there's more people getting into hacking that are more like script kiddie-ish and carpet bombing emails, but there's less of this sophisticated supply chain hacks. So they're going more after the small to medium-sized businesses. I found that really interesting. So who's doing the hacking? There's a couple different groups. One is the state-sponsored hackers, right? The Chinas, the Russias, the Irans. These guys, you can literally work for the government and be a hacker. They have guys on staff that hire you to hack into the United States and steal intellectual property. Voting information, right? We saw a lot of the DNC-based hacks and the election hacks coming from Russia. That's all state-sponsored hacking. You can get targeted by a country that pays hackers, and they could breach your business. And then we got the APTs, or the advanced persistent threats. These are the really sophisticated groups. They do dabble in some of the state-sponsored stuff, but they really are their own entity, and they do incredibly sophisticated hacks. Then there's the ransomware groups, and these are the ones from a professional services perspective that we see a lot of. They're the most out there. There's thousands of these that happen a week, where companies get locked up and hacked and bad things start happening. One thing I always like to share is kind of where I find this data, and if I'll shoot out links after this where you can go and you can check it out. But there's a website called darkfeed.io. It's a great website. What they do is all these different ransomware groups, they have their own homepage, and the problem with the homepage is they get shut down. They got to reopen them. Darkfeed monitors all those pages proactively. So what you can do is you can go to darkfeed.io and it'll actually tell you everything. It'll tell you like, hey, this is CONT'd ransomware's homepage. This is everyone that was breached. You can actually go in and see who they reported that were breached every single day. The scary part is if you go to this homepage and you click on that ransom monitor thing, it will actually show you the proof that they hacked someone. So like one of the hacks was Ryan Companies. You can go on there, click on Ryan Companies, and it'll show you the zip file of their data proving they hacked them. In some cases, you can actually download that data. If you don't pay the ransom, right? Their ransom was like $60 billion. They didn't pay it. They said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to lock you up, and we're going to publish your data. Anyone in the world can go and download that. And it's honestly like I first saw I call this next generation ransomware. I saw this for the first time Christmas 2 years ago. And it got my adrenaline going. So I'm like, this is scary, scary stuff. It didn't seem like it was that long ago when a ransom was $5,000. Now we're talking $60 billion for a ransom. It's crazy. And they're doing it because people are paying it, right? That's the reality of it. And this is one of their graphs you can have. So you can see these are the latest ransomware victims. J. Irwin, Ryan Companies, Gigabyte, Accenture had that big hack. That's the ransom amount right there. And then on the right, every month they update who the top ransomware groups are. So you can see Conti's big, Revel's a big group, Lockbit 2.0. There's different groups and more groups every single month, but I mean, you can go on there and click on one of these and you'll see all the information about that ransom. But Accenture's $44 billion ransom, that's a steep one. That's a steep one. So that's really the goal, right? The goal of sharing all this is so you guys don't end up like one of these companies. All right, so what state-sponsored hacking did we see in 2021? China did some big hacks against US phone carriers. What we found that they were looking for were phone records, text messages, intellectual property. A lot of it was based on vaccine data that they wanted to steal. They were also responsible for all those big exchange 0 days that you saw. There were actually 6 different hacking groups out of China that had their hands in those hacks. So they're really sophisticated and really they're incredibly motivated to carry out their attacks. Russia, the Sandworm group came back out. Sandworm was a group where they specialized in what's called blackout attacks. So they shut off power grids. They first came to notoriety during the Olympics, where they blacked out the Olympics for a couple hours. There was no power anywhere. They came back on in 2021, started doing that again. What they estimate is state-sponsored hacking alone in 2021 cost $100 billion just in the United States. So these are real threat actors, real motivated people who are hell-bent on taking down industries. Then we got the APTs. These guys are groups of incredibly sophisticated hackers, and what they want to do is they want to gain money. All of them except Anonymous, right? Lazarus and COZYBEAR, their goal is to hack companies and extort them for billions of dollars. Anonymous is more of the hacktivist group. We'll get into that a little bit later. They operate differently. Some think they're good, some think they're bad. I'm a little indifferent, but I am partial to some of their hacks, and we'll go over that. So COZYBEAR's Hall of Fame, right? They're out of Russia. What have their biggest hacks been, and what kind of led them to where they are today? Their first hack, I don't know if you guys remember this. I think it was a Super Bowl commercial. It was the Career Builder one with the Office monkeys, where like it was some rock song. They were running around the office dancing. They actually carried out what they called the Office Monkey attack, and they phished a bunch of DoD organizations, private equity firms that are associated with DoD, and sent them this Adobe Flash video of the Office monkeys, and people loved it. They clicked on it, they ran it, downloaded malware, and they compromised a ton of government networks through an Office monkey video. Kind of crazy, kind of wild to think that people fall victim to that, but they did. A lot of research, US proprietary research data was stolen during that hack. They had their hand in the DNC hack, the John Podesta email breach. So you guys probably remember the Hillary Clinton email breach, all that stuff that was going on. These guys phished John Podesta's Gmail account, basically purported to be Gmail, and said, hey, your account's been hacked. Click this link to reset your password. He clicked the link. It said, enter your password. He entered his password. It said, okay, your account's unlocked. And that password went to the COZYBEAR and their subpart, Fancy Bear, not to Google. So that was a pretty big hack. COVID-19 research data. These guys targeted a ton of research firms and pharmaceutical companies and stole a lot of intellectual property relating to the vaccine. The funny part to me is that they've identified that these companies were hacked and that research data was stolen, but no one's came forward and said they were breached. Like, oh yeah, they've gotten vaccine data from Pfizer and Moderna, but no one's came forward with the hack. So clearly there's some reporting things there, right? And that's one thing we always see is that when places get hacked, they're not always the swiftest on reporting. And then the SolarWinds Orion hack, right? That was huge, 18,000 affected customers. This was really the first hack of its kind when we talk about multiple implants. What they did is they installed like 12 or 13 different malware variants on those machines, different shellcode runners, different languages, just in case, right? One didn't work, they had 11 other alternatives, or one got deleted. They got a lot of ways to stay in that system. Really sophisticated hacking group. They're actually regarded as the most dangerous hacking group in the world right now. So these guys, big hackers. The Lazarus group out of North Korea, they started out, and this was really fascinating to watch, is how fast they went from really basic denial of service attacks in South Korea into the Sony Pictures hack, right? I mean, in 2012, they were literally, just doing what I was doing when I was playing Halo, sending a ton of traffic to someone, knocking off their network. 2 years later, they do the Sony Pictures hack, which was huge, right? 2 months inside the network, copied a bunch of files, deleted a bunch of data, sold all that data. That screenshot is hacked by GOP. Their prior name was Guardians of Peace. They keep changing their name. Then they had my favorite hack of all time, which was an Ocean's 11 type bank heist. In 2016, they targeted the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. What they did is they actually found a job posting on their website, sent a resume for that job posting. That resume had malware in it. They sat in that network for months, literally months. I think it was February of 2016. There was a time difference between Sri Lanka and New York, and they exploited that. Were able to drain $114 million from, it was like a Belarus national bank account. The funny part is it was supposed to be $1 billion, but they were using a shell account from like the Sri Lanka Refugee Foundation, and they spelled foundation fundation. Instead of F-O-U-N, they spelled it F-U-N. And that triggered an alert, that triggered a review, and they only got 114 million instead of $1 billion. So hackers, right? They're really smart until they're not. Spelling issues have always plagued hackers, whether it's the phishing emails, whether it's spelling something through a bank transfer. I mean, if you're an English major, right? Maybe you got a nice career path coming to you for hackers. They might have a job for you. The AstraZeneca hack, this was really sophisticated. What they did is they wanted COVID data. They posed as LinkedIn recruiters, went through AstraZeneca's LinkedIn page and started messaging all their, a bunch of their employees with fake job offers. They had fake shell companies. Hey, we got a great opportunity for you based on COVID-19. Do you want to interview? They actually interview them for jobs. They'd send them job offer PDFs laced with malware in order to get into the AstraZeneca network. Pretty sophisticated, pretty creative hack. These guys don't play around. Then you got Anonymous. I like to call them the DDoS OGs, right? They're one of the first people to really commercialize the denial of service attacks. 2008, Project Chanology, they launched a huge attack into the Scientology. They used a tool that's very near and dear to my heart, the low orbit ion cannon. That was one of my first denial of service attacks through Halo. And they were really just trolls, right? What they do is they'd send, faxes with a bunch of black dots on it to drain their fax machines, prank calls, stuff like that. In 2014, they got a little bit more sophisticated. They hacked the KKK, DDoSed their websites, their message boards, published all the names and addresses for all these active KKK members, doing a bunch of other nefarious stuff there. Then in 2020, they were really quiet until last year, and they got a little weird. And what they did is they claimed they hacked Jeffrey Epstein, a bunch of stuff related to him. They said, Trump was involved in Epstein's prostitution ring. Then they also said that they had evidence that like Michael Jackson's death, Kurt Cobain's death, a bunch of other celebrities' deaths was actually because of Epstein, because that they had information on his ring. And that's kind of where the whole anonymous organization fell apart. 2021, Texas Heartbeat. This was their latest one. Anonymous is a big pro-life kind of liberal hacking group, and basically they legalized abortion in Texas. There is a IT service provider there. I think they were an MSP called Epic that specializes in alt-right or right-wing companies. They hacked Epic, leaked all their passwords, private keys, all that data on their website. So as you can see, Anonymous not really in it for the money. They're really in it, for the fame, right? They're hacktivists. They're activists that use their hacking knowledge to prove a point. So different hackers, still really relevant. I've witnessed, people, small businesses that do something wrong on social media, and Anonymous says they're going to hack them. They're going to launch an attack on them. So they don't just target the big guys; they target everyone. And there's such a loosely knit group of hackers; they're all over the place. All right, switching gears on the ransomware groups, CONT'd is the one that we see really the most of. They're the biggest ransomware group out there. They're regarded as the most ruthless and most damaging group in all of operations right now. Basically, what they do is they not just lock you up. In years past, you'd get lock up a ransomware, like, oh, I got backups, I'm good to go. You wipe it, you back up, you're fine. Now what they do is say, oh, so you have backups, that's great. Well, if you don't want us to publish your data, that's $3 million. If you don't pay us by the end of next week, we're publishing that data. You can actually go, and on the right-hand side, that's a little picture of it. They have support websites. Their support rivals that of like Microsoft. You can go on a website and talk to a 24/7 CONT'd ransomware agent and negotiate with them and say, hey, I don't have 3 million, can I give you 1.5? Or hey, can you help me out? And they'll work with you. I mean, it's pretty crazy. So how did they do it? Believe it or not, CONT'd hired a bunch of pen testers, guys like myself that were doing this for a profession did some side work with CONT'd. One of them got burned by CONT'd and published their whole playbook online. So at that point, all the threat research firms, the threat intel firms, the antivirus firms had CONT'd's data where they can then say, okay, now we're going to defend ourselves against it. The really shocking part is that they use the same tools, the same scripts, the same methodologies that actual professional hackers and trained hackers like myself use. PowerView and PowerSploit, those are typical PowerShell-based tools that a lot of industry experts use to bypass antivirus and enumerate networks. Cobalt Strike is a really popular penetration testing tool. What they do is they crack it, of course. They get the free version of it, they hack it, and they distribute it to all of their network. Sharp Chrome, Kerber Roasting, Mimikatz, all of that stuff is stuff that I use every single day, but it's also stuff that they do when they're locking places up with ransomware. The thing I found really interesting and something that I actually learned from them is how they utilize RMMs, Atera, Screen Connect, AnyDesk. What they'll do, and really what they're known to do, is if you have one of those like a next-gen AV and advanced antivirus, but you whitelist Screen Connect or something like that, they'll actually find that out and they'll register for Screen Connect, pay for it, and then install Screen Connect on your machine so that they can get in, because Screen Connect's whitelisted, right? They just install it and you're good to go. Pretty good idea, honestly. Something I actually stole from them. The other thing is they recruit pen testers, guys like myself. They're on Twitter, they're on forum boards, they're on Reddit. They're trying to find guys like myself to carry out these attacks, and they're smart about it. Who are they targeting? They're really targeting businesses that are affected by COVID. So hospitals. What we're seeing in the industry is hospitals, especially in areas that are heavily hit by COVID, that are really stressed. They go, hey, these guys are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They don't have time to even treat their patients. Let's hack them. If we hack them, they're going to pay us whatever we want because they need to focus on patient care right now. So they follow the news, they follow all that stuff. Colonial Pipeline, Brentag, JBS, all those industries that have either had a business spike or a business downfall from COVID, they're going to target that. What we saw with CONT'd, and this was last year, typical ransom was between 900K and 25 million. I mean, you saw essentially they want $44 billion for that ransom. Pretty insane. And this is really how they get into your network. I mean, a lot of it's through phishing and social engineering. This is an email purportedly from the World Health Organization. If you see the top there, right, it's from @who-pc.com. Who doesn't own that domain? So they're sending it from a fake domain. Again, the English is actually really, really good. It's got the WHO logo at the bottom. I mean, if you don't know any better, you would think that this email is from WHO. Then, of course, attached to it is a file. When you open that file, it's a DocuSign link. You hit review, you download something, it starts infecting your network, and bad things start happening. I mean, just reviewing these emails, the English is great. I mean, it's better than a lot of people that I work with, honestly. And these are hackers in foreign countries, so it's crazy to see. So what do they target? I mean, really anything they can. They usually get in through phishing and vishing. Vishing is voice phishing. Like a really old example of it is, getting the IRS phone calls that you owe 15 grand in back taxes and all sorts of stuff like that. They're more sophisticated. They might call us tech support. They might do reconnaissance about your business and see that you're using a company for outsourced IT and call as them. They get pretty sophisticated. VPN and cloud apps, they'll get into that as well. But what I've noticed a lot is that, as time's going on, more and more businesses are using two-factor. These guys have crafted their phishing to bypass two-factor. And what they're doing is they'll send a phish out, they'll have someone log in. The second phish, once they log in, will be enter your two-factor code. There'll be someone live at a keyboard on their actual webmail logging in. As soon as they enter that two-factor code on the phish site, they put it in before they register, and they're in before them. So they can actually phish two-factor now. It's really just advanced social engineering where it requires manual intervention, but we're seeing it happen. There's also tools that have come out that can help bypass or exploit misconfigured two-factor. One's called MFA Sweep. What this is, it's a tool where if you find an email and password combination in Azure or an online Microsoft service, you can run this and it'll check for things like Graph API, Management API. A lot of these cloud-based Microsoft services that people don't protect with two-factor. And what I've seen is Outlook 365 protected with two-factor, but Microsoft's MDM not. And we've been able in some testing to bypass MFA or bypass the non-existence of MFA on their MDM, get in there, change the phone that the two-factor goes to, and then log into the to O365 with two-factor. So you really need to make sure you have two-factor on everything, because all it takes is for one thing to not have two-factor to really kind of peel back the layers of that onion and start going down the rabbit hole. Well, what does this have access to? What does this have access to? Then eventually you might find up, hey, I can control their two-factor phone or log in from this. And I hear this all the time, right? People say two-factor, it's so convenient, right? And I'm like, listen, you know what's really not convenient? Having a $40 billion ransom. I can guarantee that's way less convenient than having two-factor. So don't fight your IT provider, your IT manager, your IT personnel on two-factor, because a lot of hacks that we've seen could have been avoided by it. Physically breaking into companies. COVID has changed that as well. And there's one tool that I love. It's the most inexpensive tool. Every single person has it, and it's a mask. The mask is the best tool when you're talking about physically breaking into a company. The reason for that is because I've had clients and I've seen cases where there's facial recognition. When COVID was at its peak, people just disabled facial recognition. They didn't want you to take that mask off at any means necessary. I mean, I saw people going in with like welding masks on because they were so scared of COVID, and just, the huge ventilator, respirator masks. They're not taking that off, so they would just disable it. So all the stuff, all that protections they put in place, it was gone. Typically with the mask, I mean, you walk in, people don't know who you are with a mask on. I mean, I'll be at the mall and I'll see one of my friends that I've been seeing every week with a mask on, and I'm afraid to go up to him and say, hey, John, is that you? Because I'm like, what if it is? Well, what if it isn't? You know what I mean? So the mask has changed that. And for physically breaking the companies, that mask is your best tool. And, I've been successful in a lot of these engagements just wearing a mask, walking in, and people are like, well, I didn't really recognize you, but, you could have been Jake, but, I've never seen Jake with a mask on. It goes on and on. All right, another case study is, this was a company that was affected by COVID because they processed PPP loans. So what it was, and what we saw is it was a small company. They didn't do a whole lot of business. As soon as PPP hit, they had to start processing a ton of PPP loans and data. They're small. They weren't really scaled or set up to do it, so they had to scale fast. And what they ended up doing is they said, well, how are we going to store this data? We got tons of social security numbers, loan applications, financial data. We got to find a way to process this effectively. They did probably what they shouldn't have done. They went to their web developer and said, hey, can you develop something on a website to process these loans? What the developer ended up doing was they ended up adding an extension onto their WordPress site that processed all this data. The extension also had a critical risk vulnerability, and because of that, any data that was entered into it could be seen by a hacker. So when you start using WordPress extensions to gather sensitive information, you're probably in danger, and that's what these guys found out. What they did is they essentially used a contact form and just added some extra fields in it for, like, what's your social, right? What's your revenue, things like that. Post on their website. What they didn't realize is when you register for this contact form, any registered user can see any other registered user's data. So if I have a business and Ted has a business, if I put my information in, I can see Ted's data and Ted can see my data. It's just a misconfiguration of the plugin. So it was bad. It was really, really bad. There was 23,000 unique accounts that were compromised during this breach. So, and that's something we see, right? I mean, if you think about COVID in general, the rush for remote work, the rush for scaling in ways we haven't scaled before, security usually falls by the wayside because of that. And this is a great example of it. So what do we recommend there? Obviously, don't store sensitive information in contact forms. That's a no-no. You really shouldn't do it on WordPress sites that are vulnerable. And we recommend secure storage, cloud storage, on-prem protected encrypted storage, databases, things like that. And just a little aside on WordPress, if you have WordPress, one thing I always stress, and when I was in college, I did some WordPress development, so I'm pretty familiar with it, is you have to make sure not just WordPress is up to date, but all your plugins are up to date. WordPress is a lot like an operating system. You have to make sure Windows is up to date, and you have to make sure Office, Java, Adobe is up to date. The same concept there, because all it takes, you can be updating WordPress, but not updating the plugins, and all it takes is for one of those plugins to be bad, and that site's going down. And we see that happen. All right, one of my favorite stories, because it has to do with video gaming, of course, is the 2020 laptop boom. You guys probably remember, when COVID hit in March 2020, finding a laptop was like finding a needle in a haystack. They were selling out. They're like buying a car right now, right? I mean, they're going for overpriced. You can't find them anywhere. It was really, really hard to find a laptop. So what would people do, and what have I seen people do? Well, the problem is they can't get a laptop. The office is closed. They need to adopt remote work. So what do? Well, they let them use the home computer. They say, you know what, go to the computer little Jimmy's playing Fortnite and Minecraft on, just put your work stuff on there for a little bit. It won't last forever. We'll get you a laptop. What's the worst that can happen, right? Well, I'll tell you what can happen. That's of course my inspirational gerbil telling, terrific idea, nice work, all sorts of good stuff. Well, the problem is your kid's playing Fortnite on the machine, and the problem is he's not good at Fortnite. So he does what I wanted to do when I was 16 years old, but he wants to cheat. The problem is he starts downloading all sorts of aimbots, speed hacks, wall hacks, all sorts of hacks to up his Fortnite game. Well, those hacks aren't really hacks for Fortnite, they're exploits for his computer. So the computer becomes infected with malware. Now, Karen goes on the machine to log into work, and that's got spyware and malware on it. It starts getting company data, personal files. It starts going from that machine, infecting all the other VPN connected machines on the network, and all that data starts going bye-bye. And that's all because, little Jimmy was bad at Fortnite. So there's two things that could have solved it, right? You can teach your kid not to suck at Fortnite and you won't have this problem, or you can teach your kid, or you can as a business not let them use personal computers for work use. And that's one thing we always stress, because it's the Wild West once you start doing that. We saw a similar thing with VPNs. What we saw was that people were going remote. They didn't want to issue VPN licenses. So what they do, well, they started using free solutions like TeamViewer. TeamViewer is great and all, but from a corporate VPN perspective and a control and security perspective, not the best thing in the world. Not centrally managed, no restrictions, no security. Authentication is basically whatever you want it to be. It's the Wild West. One of the biggest things that we've seen exploited with TeamViewer is the random password and, of course, the ID. The ID can be brute force. You can just say, have a hacker go all day long, start guessing numbers. Once they guess a number, they start guessing passwords. Eventually, you're gonna be in. We saw tons of PayPal accounts drained, tons of bank accounts drained, tons of computers hacked. I mean, I witnessed a case where TeamViewer was on a domain controller because they didn't want a VPN in. That person logged into the DC. There was an admin logged in. They added their own admin account, and the game was over at that point. They hacked the whole network, all because there was basically unsecured and non-commercial TeamViewer on that machine. So TeamViewer is good for personal use, right? I mean, if you got a computer in your house that you want to access, but to replace a VPN, that's a no-no. And the hackers are going to cash in on that. So the recommendations there, right? The educational part of the show is don't allow employees to install software. I mean, really, if you buy the extra VPN license, it's going to go a long way. Use app whitelisting and blacklisting, meaning don't allow employees to install apps that aren't company approved. And then, like I said, spend the cash on that VPN license. It'll go a long way. All right, and that concludes my part of the show. Ted, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's see. I want to remind our audience, questions for James, throw them in the Q&A log. We'll have a couple minutes for formal Q&A here in a couple minutes. But what I want to do next is hand the ball to Michael to make a few concluding remarks before we go into formal Q&A.
So we just heard James try to scare us so that we can't sleep well at night with everything that's happened since COVID hit. So the question is, well, all right. So I heard all that stuff now. What is it? What do I do? Right? And for us, when we talk to our clients, we talk about good security posture, like really strong security minimum standards. And when we talk to our customers, some of the things that recently that really wanted to focus on is next-gen antivirus, awareness, security awareness training, multi-factor authentication, which James talked about, and then of course having some last line of defense and backup. One thing I don't have an arrow on, but James talked about it, and I took a note here, is around patch management, right? Patches and updates. And that's critical. The other thing that's critical is when you set up the software, is ensuring that stuff is properly configured. A lot of MSPs or technology providers, in-house IT people, they go and they say, oh, I need to set up Office 365. I'm going to register, I'm going to set up Office 365, I'm going to create a bunch of accounts and emails flowing, and I think their job is done. And that's like the worst possible thing that people can do, is just sit there and say, oh, my job's done, I set it up. Well, you've done nothing to harden it, you've done nothing to set up security and logging and alerting, right? So yes, you have this really awesome tool, but unless you're actually configuring it properly, like, you're opening yourself up to to possible issues. I talked about the next gen, antivirus. The next gen antivirus is something you absolutely have to adopt. The old antivirus, and for people that have followed this our channel and have listened to these things before, it just doesn't cut it anymore. They're at best 30% to 50% effective against next generation threats. They don't have these advanced features that are here. And this next gen endpoint detection response, next gen AV, is 99% effective as opposed to 50% effective. Everybody here can do that math. I know which one I would rather go with. So as far as what you can do and what you have going on, ensure that you've moved into some of these next gen features. Weakest link, your employees. So what do you do? James talked about how they've gotten more sophisticated. It's not just about looking to see if the English is broken, poorly written, and so forth. You need to be able to train your people and say, okay, what are you looking for? Well, look at the email address, right? Is that the real domain? Is the O in the domain a 0, right? Did somebody try to spoof the domain? So there are these things where you actually have to really sit down with your employees and do some type of training. We utilized KnowBe4. We just had a meeting this past week about how effective this is. And I was reading a couple of different case studies. One was from Accenture, and they talked about how you have to be doing enforcement training at least 4 times a year, right? Because after about 3 months into 4 months, people get laxed. As James said, they're sitting in their pajamas, right? And they're lazy boy, right? There needs to be some level of reinforcement where you have to tell them, hey, don't get lazy. When you get emails, don't just be quick to click links. And not only is there complacency involved, but if you're super busy and you need to get through a lot of work, that's another place where we see people make those mistakes. They're just opening up things, clicking on things that normally they might have paused and just said, is this real? But they're just trying to get through their work, really quickly. But security awareness training, with the employees being the weakest link, is absolutely critical. I encourage everybody to do some level, some formal actual security training here. Multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. James talked about how there's different hacks and the ways around it, and those are out there. But a properly configured MFA and SSO solution is over 99% effective against any of the hacks that are out there today. So yes, is it 100%? No, nothing in security is 100%. But it's something you absolutely have to employ, and it's super easy. And I have a quick image up here for everyone. The one on the left just is, hey, when you go to log into your SSO portal, you put in your username and password like you would, if you didn't have SSO. And then what's going to happen is on your phone, an app's going to pop up and try to verify, is this you? Is this you logging in from this particular device? And it's literally just, hitting that button that says, I accept that it is actually me, and then I'm in. One of the things that James had talked about as far as things that are not secure from a multi-factor authentication standpoint is text messaging, right? Those text message codes, there's a lot of ways that those things come in through different applications where people can actually see them. And as James talked about, grab that code before you even see it, log in, and then own your account. Utilizing an application for MFA is way better. James, I don't know if you wanted to comment on any of that, because I know you were pointing out that even MFA can sometimes be bypassed.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think one of the most interesting hacks that I've seen, this was by actually another penetration tester that I network with, is he was able to compromise an Apple ID from an iPhone, and with that, you're able to then view text messages, and then he was able to view the 2-factor code the phone's it's a personal phone, right? The company doesn't control the Apple ID or the password on that phone. He compromised that, got the two-factor text message, and then was able to use it that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you're way better off having having an application to do the MFA portion. So what happens when all that fails, right? They get through it. Well, you need backup. And some of the really sophisticated attacks where people get into your environment and they don't do anything yet. They hang around, they're looking at what you're doing, they're scoping the environment, they're seeing, where else in the network is data stored, where are their backups, do you have a storage solution that has snapshots in it, which is how you're backing up? Oh, are you backing it up to a remote location? And if you are backing it up to a remote location, am I throwing in a keylogger, figuring out who has access to that remote location, and then saying, all right, now I know their username and password of that remote location. There's no MFA in place for that. So now I'm waiting and I'm collecting data, and then I launch my attack, right? Sunday night, early Monday morning, I go in, I wipe out all your data. I wipe out your backups. I wipe out your snapshots. Oh, you thought you had data stored somewhere else, like on the cloud somewhere, but I was able to have a keylogger in, and now I got that data. So it's like, so what I'm talking about here is you have to have backups to your backups, right? And one thing we really love about Datto is what's called an off-network backup solution. So you as the customer don't have access to the Datto device itself. You don't log directly into the Datto portal, so that if a hacker gets access to your environment, they're not going to be able to use that keylogger to get access to it. Everybody here should know that, of course, we protect everything we use with multi-factor authentication and single sign-on in the most secure way possible. So if in the event you get to that really unfortunate point of, oh my God, they got everything, and I need to get my data back, using these off-network backup solutions like a Datto is a really great way to protect yourself. Now, that doesn't protect you from them posting the fact that you were hacked, right, or sharing your data on the internet. But if you really, if really what we're doing is trying to protect so that you can get your business back up and running, this is a great way to do it. James, any comments on any of that stuff?
No, you covered it well.
Good. So we also talk about, there's like the basic security posture things that we want our clients to do. And then there's some more enhanced and advanced things that you could do. Manage detection and response. This is where we're utilizing, this is where we're now collecting data across everything that you use from a technology standpoint. It's seeing what's happening on the firewall. It's collecting logs from the servers. It's collecting logs from the workstations. If you have a DNS proxy that's logging, what websites people are going to and what's happening, collecting logs from Office 365. So what this is doing is collecting all this information, and it's looking at everything. And if it looked at one thing by itself, it'd say, well, this is pretty benign. This thing by itself is benign. But what it does is it looks across all of the transactions that are happening in your technology stack and tries to say, well, actually, if I add these things together, this looks like a sophisticated attack. It looks like somebody's trying to exfiltrate data in a very slow way by going through these different methods. So that's the MDR, where it's looking at it and then it's telling you, you could possibly have a problem, or flat out telling you absolutely have a problem, shut down the network and make sure that you're, that you get a security expert, like a James involved, and see exactly what happened, when they got in, how they got in, and then we put the whole cybersecurity framework in place to mitigate all of that. Next part is managed risk. And what managed risk is constantly doing a vulnerability assessment. So it's just something that's constantly scanning all the workstations in your environment, the technology stack that you use, and it's comparing it to a database to say, is there anything that's misconfigured, right? Things that we should be doing to harden the environment. So that's managed risk. And managed risk is vulnerability scanning, which is the next point on here. But again, managed risk is it's constantly happening. A vulnerability scan is a point in time, right? I want to have somebody come in, point in time, scan my stack, and then give me a report and tell me exactly what's happening. Penetration testing. Actually, I have no business talking about this. I'll actually let James talk about it, since this is absolutely his forte. So James, why don't you tell people what penetration testing is?
Yeah, sure. It's basically emulating a real threat actor. So it's trying to break into your network. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can do it from an external perspective, meaning a remote hacker, which takes the vantage point of a guy in Russia, a guy in Syracuse, a guy in Boston, whatever, trying to break into your external services, cloud services, things like that. There's other types of tests, such as internal testing, where what we do is we start on the inside of the network as just a node on the network with no credentials and see how far we can go. And typically what we find with the kill chain there is you go from 0 to hero, right? It's no access to user access, local admin access, eventually domain admin access. And once you're there, it's you get the keys to the kingdom. We like to throw in other social engineering and advanced antivirus evasion techniques, and we call that red teaming, which is basically throw the kitchen sink at us, do phishing, do pretexting, do vishing. I mean, if they want us to break in, we'll try to break in. Figure out what technologies we're using, craft payloads to bypass our antivirus, see if you can get in, by sending a malicious word macro. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but they're all really tailored to replicate and emulate what actual threat actors like CONT'd ransomware and like COZYBEAR are doing.
And then the last bullet point here, IT policy consulting. IT policies, it's when you just sit down and look at like the 30 different policies and the multiple pages of text, it's a kind of like a daunting exercise. But really when you start, breaking it down, like, piece by piece, chunk by chunk, what it does is it forces you to sit down and understand, okay, what am I using from a technology standpoint? How am I using it? Am I using it in the most secure way, or am I minimizing the risk as best as possible? So it creates this kind of roadmap when we go through this type of exercise to understand, okay, what do I have and what's the best way to use it? So it forces you to ask yourself those questions. And the biggest mistake in IT policy creation and consulting is if you're trying to do it on your own and you're doing it because you have to put a check in the box, you go from ignorance to negligence if you just write a policy that you have no intention of following. So you have to really make sure that, okay, this actually practically allows me to conduct work and do it in a way that I'm happy with the balance, right? When you weigh out efficiency versus risk and you say, okay, yep, nope, this is practically how we do it, and I feel like I'm covering the bases as well as I can. And that's it. We're at the end, Ted, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so let's, there's a handful of good questions that have come in. I'd encourage everyone to, this is a good opportunity to put in additional questions. So let's just back up, I guess. This is maybe one for James. Just, you shared some of the different dollar figures around ransoms being paid. What are the trends you're seeing in terms of, are ransoms being paid more or less? I mean, if we kind of go back 12 months, 24 months, are people paying the ransom less frequently, or is there kind of a steady state? What are you seeing in terms of, incident response engagements where you're involved and you're privy to kind of what's happening with whether the bad actors are being paid or not?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So the ones that I've witnessed have been, it's a mix, and it's really dependent upon whether or not that person has cyber insurance. And cyber insurance will pick up part of the tab. Now, I've seen cyber insurance pick up tabs of millions of dollars for ransomware. It's not to say that they're going to be an insurance client after that, but they'll pick up the tab and they'll help out with that. So if they have insurance, I mean, normally they'll try to negotiate that down to a reasonable rate and they'll pay. But I mean, for a lot of these really big hacks that you see, like even like the Colonial Pipeline stuff, if they know they got you and they know you have no option, you got to pay. I mean, it's either you pay or you don't get your data back, or you don't get your computers unlocked. And if you don't have backups, right, like Mike was saying, if you don't have backups to your backups and you're locked up and your computers are unusable, what do? You got to pay. So it depends. Each case is different. I would say that we're seeing less people paying now for the data leaking, because insurance carriers are becoming so much more picky on who they're going to cover. Before, cyber insurance was like, yeah, you want cyber insurance, here it is. You're probably not going to use it. Now people are using it and it's expensive, right? Those insurance companies are paying out, and there's a lot less companies that are willing to cover you now. And now what I've been witnessing from the incident response side is you're only allowed to use incident response companies that are endorsed by those insurance companies. So from an IR world, that list of IR vendors is getting significantly smaller, because it's only who the Corvuses and the First Insurance groups will allow you to use. So it's really that's been evolving a lot in the past 3 years. It's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think for everybody who's joining us today or listening to this on demand, we just had a good session a quarter ago with an expert on the cyber liability insurance coverage area. And to James's point, the industry is evolving, and the standards are going up. The carriers are trying to turn this into a profitable business by not having to pay out losses, the huge losses. And so I think the one area that they're really beefing up is they're requiring the insureds, the clients they're underwriting, to do what they say they're supposed to. I mean, to attest, to have the right cybersecurity standards, like Michael mentioned, and to make sure that people are actually following through and actually enforcing and leveraging all of the cybersecurity tools that they're saying they're using, and that they have the policies and procedures in place to do so. And it's becoming a big issue that if you do suffer a breach, the carriers are looking at whether you actually followed through on what you said you were going to do. So the stakes are higher. You can't like write a check, an insurance premium check, and have this problem go away. It's like you have to, insurance is one layer of your defenses, but you have to really follow through on what you're doing.
Right.
So another one I want to go back to is just tell us, James, real briefly, for our audience's benefit, so what are some of the dangers with MFA that leverages only SMS or texting? And then what is the better way to do it? I mean,
Yeah.
or what are some of the ways that MFA is being exploited? And then what's the right solution or best practice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the text message I would stay away from, especially because, like I said, I had a friend of mine who was able to exploit that through iCloud accounts. If you don't manage, if it's a BYOD, if employees bring their own phone, you probably don't manage your iCloud account. You don't manage where they have two-factor on that. You don't manage the security of their phone. If something happens to their phone, especially in how connected these devices are becoming, where I can just enter a password on my MacBook and I can get my text message on my computer, I can get them on my iPad, I can get them anywhere, and that's becoming a real issue. The other thing that I'm seeing, and this is more of a user behavior, is the push notifications. I was always a big advocate of push notifications. However, on a recent engagement, what I did is I logged into an account and I was like, oh, it's going to ping your phone for a push, and the person let me in. And I'm like, why would this person let me in? And I figured it out. It's like they're just so accustomed to always hitting that green check mark on the push that they don't question it, right? Their brain has been wired to say, I log in and I hit the green check mark. That's in their head. That's what they're trained to do. They never really think, well, maybe I should hit the red X instead of the green check mark, right? So there's a little bit of a user education standpoint there too, and that's why I always recommend, as part of your annual awareness, make sure you tell them, hey, this is how two-factor works. It seems really, really elementary, but users don't really understand it. They understand the behavior of, okay, I enter my password, I hit this, I'm good. So I use like the Okta verified PIN, where you have to go on your phone to get the PIN, and it's like the soft token kind of thing, because then they actually have to think, they have to stop, they have to go in, they have to grab that PIN, they have to enter it in. They can't just hit one button on their phone, forget about it, and let an attacker in. So those are my feelings towards that. And whenever I've recommended that in a client engagement, they've always liked it. The user's like, well, it's so much harder to find a PIN. I'm like, well, if you wouldn't just keep hitting the green check mark when a guy from Russia tries to log in and it tells you he's from Russia, maybe you wouldn't, what I mean? That's why we can't have nice things, Ted, because of things like that. So.
Yeah, the only last thing I want to add on to that is email as well. Don't use your email as the other second form of MFA if you can avoid it, because a lot of these email accounts get compromised. People have weak passwords. They don't have MFA set up on their personal email account, so it's another area you'd want to try to avoid.
Okay, well, with that, not all MFA solutions are created equal, and you need experts to properly configure and deploy and manage these things going forward. So. Good final piece of advice. We're out of time. Sorry if we didn't get to everyone's questions, but guys, thank you very much for a very informative conversation. Pandemic plundering, what's changed in cybersecurity because of the pandemic. Michael Kourkoulakos, CEO of NENS, and James Carroll of Hackett Cyber. Thank you guys very much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you guys on a new webinar in the new year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Happy holidays.